I've done false starts and stops. I had a technical problem. I had made a video on my laptop, and it appears that I'm having real trouble gaining um, internet access. But so anyway, I'm doing it this way, and hopefully I won't have a battery issue or an internet issue or an anvil fall on me. Um, because the thing is that I just a couple of days ago I was on Facebook, and I had a lot of problems on Facebook, as I thought was the subject of one of my last videos, with people being idiotic. And then I was on Twitter, and then I came back to um, YouTube here, and then I saw that the videos that are about Jimmy Dore get about 50 times more hits. And then I realized that that this whole hero thing in cult of personality and hero worship, it has different effects. So one of the things that Jimmy Dore fans, I mean, so first of all, obviously, I wanted to make a video about how I actually got people commenting on these videos, which is what I want, but then they didn't really make comments. Like they weren't really dealing with the material because what they wanted to do was just unload on me because I had questioned Jimmy Dore's uh, I guess integrity. Really, what I was saying was, he's a capitalist. He's not a socialist. And if you're a leftist, you can't embrace capitalism, right? I mean, it was a simple point, but people went nuts on Twitter, and a few people went nuts here. Now, yeah, I'm getting some positive feedback, but it's not a whole lot. Most of the time, I get a lot of nastiness, and you should be aware. Like, if you're a Jimmy Dore fan, you should be aware. What I think is really funny is that people like Sam Cedar and all these other people who are critical of Jimmy Dore, sometimes right, sometimes wrong, they're making these videos. They're not just making the videos to keep people in the Democratic Party and stop people from Dem exit, right? They're also making the video so that you, as a Jimmy Dore fan, will watch them. And there are a lot of people who don't like Jimmy Dore, and so they make these videos so that people who are anti Jimmy Dore will also watch their videos. So Sam Cedar makes a lot of money, or at least gets a lot of attention, right, off of Jimmy Dore. And so they do things, actually, I think they do a lot of things subconsciously to make the situation worse, to give Jimmy Dore more grist for his mill, more things to complain about, because then they can use him as a foil. Dore, and for that matter, RBN or the Revolutionary Blackout Network or whoever, the people who are pro Dem exit, they also use these people as a foil. If I'm an RBN and I make a video about, let's say, Sam Cedar talking about Jimmy Dore, I'm going to get lots of hits. People are going to want to talk about that. People are now talking about Jimmy Dore and Sam Cedar or whatever, whatever shade or controversy you want to look at. And that is now leftism on YouTube. So like there's this channel called Vanguard, and all they do, I mean, I don't want to be too critical. I'm not saying they're the worst thing ever. There's a few things that I really don't like that they represent, like the idea that they should be, as leftists, they should be laughing in the face of Marianne Williamson. But putting that aside for now, putting that aside, what their channel basically is what Mexicans call chisme. It's just basically a shade or a what is that? A gossip or a drama channel. That's what it is. And the policies and everything else, those are secondary things to them. What they really want to get involved in is the drama between whatever the drama is, Marianne Williamson and Socialist MMA, what's going on between those two, etc. And I'm being pretty clear on Marianne Williamson because I don't think this is really that controversial. Really, it shouldn't be. I think if you think you're a leftist, if you're saying you're a leftist and you're backing Marianne Williamson, there's something wrong with you because the whole idea of Marianne Williamson is what is it? What is the idea of her candidacy? The idea of her candidacy is very simple. 2024 is coming around in a primary, in a series of primaries. It's really hard for progressives to simply cheerlead Biden because that's who's going to run. And it's almost impossible because the administration is just horrible. They're lacking in every department, and they just do the bare minimum to get by. Right? I could point to, for example, transportation. We have one chemical spill every couple of days on average. The airlines are awful. What's their reaction? Well, the reaction is to yell. Buttigieg does a press conference in which essentially he just chastises some executives, and then they want to pass a rule that says that you can't, if you're an airline, you can't charge people for sitting next to their kids. That's it, right? That's their idea of confronting the system or being regulatory or whatever. I mean, that's just what they do. What they do is they take these issues and they try to figure out a way. What's the, how can we get the absolute minimum that no one could possibly complain? No one could possibly say we're going too far, right? That's what that's what they do, and you can't sell that, and you can't get people to watch your stupid videos if you're a progressive. So what do you do if you're Kyle Kalinske or your Crystal Ball? Like, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to run Marianne Williamson because now you have somebody that you're invested in, and you can make 20, 30, 40 videos on her, even though from a political standpoint it's less than serious. I mean, it's really less than serious. You can't running a challenger in a primary against an incumbent president is a very very difficult thing. Like you have to be aware of lots and lots of disgruntled, disillusioned people in your party, and it has to be real. It can't just be the liberal wing of the party. Um, But, I made a whole video about that, so I'm not going to rehash those arguments except to say that she's not a threat. She has 1/200th the popularity of Bernie Sanders, and there's no way you're going to get past black voters in the Democratic Party because black voters are, especially the ones over 40, are overwhelmingly conservative. They're not interested in progressive candidates for cultural reasons and Jim Clyburn reasons. So they're just not gonna support you. So that whole thing's a joke. I mean, I'm sorry. It's a huge joke. So anyway, on the topic of hero worship, there are a lot of people who won't confront Kalinsky and Ball because they're respected, but I don't care. So that's part of it. Another part of it is so these people are building these foils. And you have Jimmy Dore who gets people really riled up and on his side, and then you get people on the other side who get eyeballs, get people watching their videos because they're critical of Dore, and on the drama goes on and on and on, but it doesn't solve anything. And another effect that it has is if I'm having an argument with somebody, like what I detailed the other day, I was arguing with a liberal, and then they hit me with this whole thing about how I must be supportive of Putin or I must be supportive of whoever. If I'm disagreeable about this war, like if I don't think the U.S. policy should be arming Ukraine to a teeth, right? I mean, I'm very supportive of, say, anarchists in Russia that are critical of Putin and are protesting the war there. I think that's great. I'm not in Russia. I'm in over here in the US. So I have to be critical of my own government. In that sense, if I say something about that, I'm going to get hammered because people are going to put me in that category with Jimmy Dore, or they're going to assume that I agree with everything RBN says, or I agree with everything Caleb Maupin says, or I'm a Putin fanboy. That's a really popular one because some of these people don't even know who Dore is. So they think that because they're in a cult of personality, which may be I don't know, Biden or someone like that, or maybe even Bernie, because they have their own cult of personality. I must be in the equivalent. I have to be in that same camp, or I have to be in another camp, but with the same gestalt. Like I have to be personally invested in something because we're all on teams, even though that what should be apparent from this conflict, as I've already said, is that it's going to last a long time. It's going to make Ukraine a very authoritarian state, which it's already done. It's going to make them a client state, which means they're going to lobby us for more money. And it's not necessarily going to lead to battlefield victories, because the terrain is tough as well as the logistics are tough. And Russia, more or less, despite some defeats, they enjoy an advantage. It's their home turf, basically. Whatever. Point is, uh, I'm in the peace camp. I'm not in Jimmy Dore or Caleb Maupin or whatever land. Okay, so that's one of the things that hero worship does. It makes everybody in cult of personality. It makes everyone think that people are in these boxes, right? Which is absurd. It's absurd. So that's one problem. Anyway, so these are just some of the issues that come up because it feeds on itself, it leads to gossip, and then it makes people put other people in boxes, and then we are not really talking. I mean, liberals are not engaged on this topic at all. There, I'll say something to a liberal, and it just goes into the ether. It just dissipates. They're constantly asking me the straw man question. Well, so what are you saying? That we should just leave Russia to destroy Ukraine, which is a total. I mean, it's a crock. Obviously, Ukraine has enough defensive capability as it is, but what we should do is we should have a ceasefire. That's step number one, in case anybody's unclear about that. Anyway, I don't want to talk about Ukraine right now anymore. I just want to talk about hero worship and how there's too much of it. I'll give you another example from people who are disappointing. Who should I start with first? Norman Finkelstein or Chris Hedges? There was somebody else. There was a third person who was really, really disappointing me, because I thought they were smarter than that. And I mean, there's so many, right? But I mean, you could look at Norman Finkel. If you don't know who Norman Finkelstein is, he's an author. He is a college professor. There's a lot to unpack there, but there's like, I don't know, dozens and dozens of videos about him. And two things I'm going to quickly rattle off. One, I think he's transphobic. I think he's transphobic, and I think also, no, I don't think, I know, he's pro two state solution. And I think both of those things are generational. I think the way he views things is because of the generation that he came out of. I don't think, even though he's so objective about so many things, I think his objectivity fails him on a few crucial issues. So, take for example this idea of BDS, which is what boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. So he poo-poos that movement all the time, and he criticizes that movement all the time. And maybe most of those critiques land. I'm certainly not saying the movement is perfect because there's no movement that's coming out of that area that is really all that hot, to be honest with you. Um, but he attacks that movement not because of the tactics, but really because BDS doesn't believe in Israel's right to exist, right? And he believes that Israel has a right to exist. He wants the two state solution. So he wants Israel to go back to what's called pre 1967 borders. They want to go back to what they did before that conquest and let go of the occupied territories. There's some mutually agreed land swaps there, but whatever. That's what he wants, right? Um, by the way, that was the agreed framework internationally for decades. In fact, my entire life. So let me put this to you in perspective. He attacks BDS for being delusional. He says it doesn't represent the Palestinian people. He says it's delusional because it wants to end Israel as a state. He says it's delusional because there's no real international support for it. It's just basically a brand. What the hell do you call the two state solution, if not delusional and a brand? The best way for you to understand the two state solution is imagine if you're sitting around waiting for health care in the United States and a politician says, I'm not for single payer, I'm not for Medicare for all, I'm for the public option. And then nothing happens, which is, by the way, how it works here. Politician comes out and says, I'm for the public option, then nothing happens. That's what the two state solution is. The two state solution is another way of saying peace process, which is another way of saying nothing's going to change because the two state solution was never a serious option. It was never going to happen. Okay? So when Norman Finkelstein comes out and says, I'm against BDS because I just don't believe that we're going to have a, a one state solution. I think that's wrong. I think we should have a two-state solution because Israel should exist. Then he doesn't call it old school, but he gives an old school rationalism. He speaks in glowing terms of the Russian ambassador at the UN talking about how the Jews had suffered in World War II and how basically Israel is their form of an apology, giving a homeland to Jews, and that's why Israel exists, right? That's the old school version of it. And so he is basically giving, I mean, because his parents were Holocaust survivors and his parents really were Stalinists. And that's the old school Stalinist understanding of Israel, that it is right and proper to have an ethno state in the middle of the Middle East that is a European ethno state. How do I know this? There's a whole, you can look it up. There's a whole political party in Israel that is about representing Sephardic Jews. Sephardic Jews meaning Jews from the Middle East, from North Africa. Why? Because they have discrimination problems in Israel. Those are Jews. Jews were discriminated against in Israel. They have African Jews who have come there, some of which would be black to an American. They're from Ethiopia, and they're discriminated against in Israel. Those are Jews. The whole purpose of Israel is a settler colonial state run by and mostly for the benefit of European Ashkenazi Jews. That's what it is. Now you can quote the speech. You can quote the speech from the Soviet ambassador at the UN all you want. You can speak in flowery terms about how there was a case of the greatest collective psychosis in the history of mankind when the Germans instituted the Jewish Holocaust. I don't doubt that part at all. The severity, the monstrosity of those atrocities, the great scale, especially the bureaucratic scale of it. But that has nothing to do with a settler colonial state in the Middle East. It just doesn't. Sorry. And it doesn't make the two state solution real. It's been the official position of the US government up until Trump, anyway. And it was 50 years of the policy being shared by all of Europe and the United States, and nothing, and I mean nothing, happened. Nothing. Instead, Palestine was torn up into um, Bandustans, essentially, and East Jerusalem is an illegal municipality. So it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And it's to the point that the people of the West Bank, they don't even really particularly care what happens in Gaza. That's how bad and separated and fractured and atomized they are. So I have a major, major problem with that. Oh, we're 20 minutes live. I'm just gonna keep going. Long ramble. and but I mean that's just an example. That whole old school thing is generational. It doesn't apply. It just doesn't apply anymore. It doesn't. I'm sorry for Norman, but I think that's a horrible rationale. I don't think it works. So, you can't say BDS is out of touch or isn't realistic or just a brand, and the two-state solution isn't. Come on, who are you trying to fool? And they're hurtling towards one nation. I'm not saying one nation or one state solution. I'm saying they're forming one country. Imagine this is, I think, the refutation of Finkelstein's idea. Imagine if you had to start let's say, the United States with a portion of the population being black slaves. As it is, after they were emancipated, they form what, like 11-12% of the population, and they're not fully integrated into capitalism or politically integrated either. A lot of their votes, I mean, first of all, you have the poll tax and the literacy tests and red line and all kinds of things, and some of those are still operative in some ways. Um, Imagine if instead of 12% of the population, they were like 38% or 42% or 52%. The birth rate of Palestinians greatly exceeds that of Jews. So imagine a world where you formed a state that was primarily for the benefit of white settler colonials, and you had people of color form a majority. What would you have to do to make that state run? All right, that it's unspeakable. You can't be a lefty and be for that, because it would make everything in the U.S. That I just mentioned, the segregation and the redlining and the poll taxes and the literacy tests, it would make those things pale in comparison. I mean, you'd have to have a police state even worse than the one we have now. So that is just, it's a no go. It's a no go. But that's the de facto, right? Because Norman Finkelstein's an intellectual. He knows what that means. That is the de facto position. That is what is happening. Israel will be one state. Um, and it's going to be a state which will oppress Palestinians. Um, all right, so not getting any. I think there's maybe one person following, but anyway, so Norman Finkelstein is just off in La La Land on that, and then on top of that, I end up finding out he doesn't like to use. He basically, when he was interviewed, he gave the exact same answer as Jordan Peterson on using they or different pronouns. The exact same answer. Again, it didn't even matter if he was a lefty back in the day. He gave a generational response because he's a boomer. And he actually said that if he had to call a student they, if he had to use that term, they, as a singular pronoun, it would diminish him. It would demean him. That's what he said. That's in, I mean, that, how do you differentiate that with Jordan Peterson? I mean, you don't. He also said some other problematic things having to do with one's sex being defined essentially by one's genitals. One's gender is defined by one's genitals. That's his position. So I don't do hero worship for this reason, man, because these people, first of all, that's a total turkey cop out answer. And it also doesn't make any sense. Just on a human level, first of all, he's not an English professor, he's a history professor. So it doesn't degrade the English language. That's actually wrong. They has been used as a singular. I know I've used it that way, and I used it that way in the 1980s. So don't give me this, you know, nonsense. He's just giving me nonsense now. You can't respect people because it diminishes you. What's wrong with you, dude? So I mean, that's just an example. So it's not just me crapping all over Jimmy Dore. I mean, I'll crap all over anybody. Um, that is stupid. And frankly, even though I've seen Finkelstein, like I said, twice. I've read his articles, and I've watched him a bunch of times. When I mean I've seen him twice, I mean live, and I've seen a bunch of his interviews. Um, yeah, I just don't do hero worship, and I think what he did fundamentally, what he's doing fundamentally against BDS is just catastrophically stupid. So I mean, there's that. Let's take Chris Hedges. Okay, he's another person. So Chris Hedges, I also have a certain amount of respect for. He's also a very well learned man. I mean, these people could carry the torch after Chomsky passes, or they could have. But I'm extremely disappointed in how he's. First of all, he's supposed to be like a swerf, so he's a sex worker, exclusionary, radical feminist. He did an interview on YouTube through RT, I think it was, or it might have been. It was one of his shows. It's on YouTube. He was interviewing an author, and he mixed up cross dressers with trans people as if this was like the 1980s or the 1990s. So he didn't understand the difference. And the entire crux of the interview was pushing fetishes and sexual lifestyles, or also being transgender, or just cross dressing. It was all identified as being symptomatic of elites, you know, because the thing is, if you're a poor person and you have a fetish, or let's say you're a poor person and you want to cross dress or whatever it is you're going to do, it's going to be do it yourself, right? His suggestion was that because this author that he was interviewing this author who said that these people were rich that she was talking to who were transgender or whatever. Uh, he was coming out and suggesting that it was an affectation of the rich. And because rich people can afford better bondage gear or rich people can afford cosmetic surgery, therefore, this is just basically an affectation, or it's a sign of degradation, or it's a sign of how we're the new Rome because people are transgender, right? Well, no, there are working class people who feel that way. There are working class people who are gay. There are working class people who are transgender. There are working class people who have a fetish. There are working class people who are sex workers, right? And this view that Hedges is pushing is boomer nonsense. He's afraid of sex. Is really what it is. And so I don't agree with that. I don't. It's not just also I don't agree with that. How is it possible that this guy is also suggesting, yeah, let's have an alliance with the right wing, right? He was for and he spoke at, I believe, or he was supportive of the Rage Against the War rally, which had about 1,500 people show up at the most. I'm being generous. So he's suggesting that the left should form an alliance with anarcho capitalists and LaRoucheites and former Nazis, if I take them at their word, former Nazis. And that's what should form an alliance, right? We should form an alliance with them if we're on the left. That's his suggestion. But somehow he thinks that that's not going to affect him personally. When he starts to make concessions to the right, that's just him being a leftist. If he's going to say we're not going to do cross pollination or cross pollination, we're not going to get these ideas from the right, and then he starts shaming sex workers and he starts shaming people who have a different sexual identity. I've got real problems with that. Um, anyway, so that's just that. I can't think of the third person I could throw under the bus today, but those are examples. I don't believe in hero worship. I think these people are extremely problematic. I think Chris Hedges is problematic. By the way, he's also, what did he say about a general strike, that he's against a general strike? In my opinion, it's really stupid. I mean, he's basically coming out and saying we can't do a general strike because that's what you do last minute. That's what you do as a last resort to remove a specific regime. But we do have a specific regime, don't we? We have a neoliberal Wall Street regime running the show. And there should be a general strike to end neoliberalism. There should be a general strike to make it so that all strikes become legal. If you have a union, you have a vote union and majority vote, that's the only thing you need. You don't need a bureaucrat to rubber stamp it. And there should be, I mean, among other things, and there should be a general strike for Medicare for all. I would add a carbon tax to that, maybe. But that's it. There should be a general strike for those three things. There are lots of things that I would implement that I would be calling for as well if I were a leader of a movement, but they're not absolutely necessary. Like, for example, abolish the Senate, that's another, I may do a video on that. But anyway, so those are my views on this topic of hero worship. This is kind of a long video, but it's not as long as some of the videos I've seen streamers do, etc. I will probably never do a video that's over an hour and a half. This video is just a little over half an hour, so it's a rarity. I probably will never do a video uh, longer than 90 minutes. I'd like some input. I'd like to know what I'm doing right or what I'm doing wrong. I might have to revisit some of these specific arguments against Hedges and provide more evidence. But if you just go onto, for example, come onto my YouTube, come onto my Twitter and interact with me, you'll see the links. You can read the articles. I mean, basically, Hedges was taking information from an anti-trans person and trying to go after Occupy Wall Street anarchists. I mean, what's that? What's that about? uh, and if you're a leftist and you're against Antifa, you better bring it. Like, you better have some specific rationale. And if you're going to cast trans people as just being all rich, you better bring it. If you're going to be like Norman Finkelstein and be a boomer and go after BDS while suggesting that two-state solution isn't a crock, like, uh, a crock of crap, like the public option or something, you better bring it. So anyway, come to my Twitter at Roger on the Left. I'd like your specific. I'm gonna list this video in a little bit. I'm gonna list it so people can watch the whole thing. 32, probably be like 35 minutes in total. I'd like some input. I'm going to put Dore in there, I think, eventually as one of the keywords, so more people will watch the damn thing. And that's it for today. And I might be. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm open to suggestions because I need better equipment. I need a better camera and stuff like that. And I don't want to be an e-beggar. But I'm in the middle. I'm in between tasks right now and making my car payment. So we'll see what happens. But I want to make more videos with better equipment. I want to interact with you guys. That's why I'm doing this more than anything else. I want to start like a little mini community where we can talk about issues. Because the next video, I think I'm going to seriously start talking. Um, it'll be a short one, but I'll be talking about something positive or what I view what the left needs to prioritize as the number one priority right now. And hint, it's not about Justice Democrats. Okay? It's not about running people. It's it's not even about talking about what's going on in the Congress. Anyway, so that's it. I'm going to list this video in a bit. Thank you so much if you watched. I really appreciate it. Either like or subscribe or join me on Twitter on Roger on the Left. And I hope you found this interesting. Okay? Thank you very much.